She demanded he get her a new flight. She didn't know he owned the airline. The air in the terminal was a stale cocktail of floor wax, jet fuel, and impatience. Ilara Vance felt the impatience as a physical thing, a low thrumming under her skin that matched the vibration of her phone. It was her third call to Julian in 20 minutes. He wasn't answering. She snapped the phone shut, the sound a sharp crack in the dull roar of the waiting area. The first-class lounge was an oasis of muted tones and complimentary sparkling water, but it offered no immunity from the one thing that leveled all travelers. A delay. Indefinite. Mechanical. That was all the smiling attendant at the desk would say, her voice a practiced, soothing melody that did nothing to soothe. Ilara stood. Her suit, a razor-sharp cut of charcoal wool, felt like armor. It usually did. Today it felt like a cage. She left the lounge and walked toward the gate, her heels clicking a sharp, angry rhythm on the polished concrete. The scene at gate B12 was a portrait of managed chaos. Families sprawled across seats, business travelers paced in tight circles, and a line of weary passengers snaked from the desk. Ilara did not do lines. She bypassed it, her eyes scanning for someone with a uniform, someone with authority, someone she could leverage. She found him near the jet bridge door. He was on his knees, a small toolkit open beside him. He wore dark work pants and a plain grey shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He was focused on the panel of the ticket scanner, his movements economical and precise. A maintenance worker. Perfect. Someone from the ground floor who would be suitably intimidated. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he would have to acknowledge her. He didn't. He continued to work, a small screwdriver turning in his hand with practiced ease. She cleared her throat. Nothing. She spoke, her voice clipped and cold, the voice she used for underperforming subordinates. "Excuse me, I need information." He finished tightening a screw before he looked up. His eyes were a calm, steady grey. They held no deference, no flicker of recognition or alarm. They simply looked. "The flight to Chicago," she said, gesturing vaguely at the departure screen. "It says, delayed. I need to know for how long. I have a connecting international flight." He looked from her face to the scanner he was working on, then back to her. "There's a problem with the hydraulic manifold on the port engine." His voice was low and even. It wasn't the voice of a gate agent. It was too quiet, too sure. She waved a dismissive hand. "I don't care what the problem is. I care about the solution. When will it be fixed? My time is valuable." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "Land doesn't rush. Neither does a cracked manifold." The comment was so unexpected, so bizarrely out of place, that it momentarily threw her off balance. She mistook his calm for insolence. "I don't have time for folksy wisdom. I pay a significant amount of money to fly with this airline, more than you probably make in a year. I expect a certain level of service. That service includes accurate information. Now, are you going to get your supervisor, or do I need to find him myself?" His expression didn't change. Not a flicker of anger, not a hint of fear. It was more unsettling than any argument. He simply absorbed her attack, the way a dark stone absorbs heat. He slowly got to his feet. He was taller than she'd realized, with the solid build of a man who worked with his hands. He wiped his palms on a rag he pulled from his back pocket. "There's a storm system moving in over the Rockies. Even if they fix the manifold in the next hour, you won't be taking off." "No one will." He looked past her at the line of tired faces. "Best to find a hotel." He started to turn away, his duty to her apparently concluded. Her frustration boiled over into raw fury. This man, this nobody, was dismissing her. She stepped into his path. Who do you think you are? I'm on the board of the company that just acquired this airline. I could have your job. It was a lie, a half-truth. The acquisition was complete, but her role was advisory at best. It was a power play, a line she'd used 100 times to get what she wanted. It didn't work. He looked down at her, and for the first time, she saw something shift in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It was something closer to disappointment. He glanced at the platinum tag on her briefcase. The name Vance was embossed in stark silver letters. Vance, he said, the name a quiet observation. Your father wouldn't have approved of this. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her father, Thomas Vance, the titan who had built an empire from nothing, the man whose ghost she was still trying to outrun. How could this mechanic, this grease-stained worker, possibly know anything about her father? He turned and walked away before she could form a reply, disappearing into the jet bridge with his toolkit. Ilara stood frozen, the noise of the terminal fading to a distant hum. The delay was forgotten. The missed connection was irrelevant. A single question echoed in the sudden silence of her mind. Who was he? The answer arrived 3 days later in a sterile boardroom 37 floors above the city. The air was chilled to a precise 68 degrees. The long mahogany table gleamed under recessed lighting, reflecting the strained faces of the Ascend Air executive team. Ilara sat at the head of the table, a position she had occupied in rooms like this for a decade. It was her natural habitat. David Chen, her chief legal counsel, stood beside a large screen. He was a small, meticulous man whose loyalty was one of the few assets Ilara trusted implicitly. As you know, he began, his voice dry, the final tranches of the acquisition were executed through a blind trust. We've been working to identify the ultimate beneficial owner. As of this morning, we have confirmation. He clicked a button. A file appeared on the screen. It was a simple corporate registry document, and below it, a photograph. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. It was him. The man from the airport. The mechanic. His face looked the same, the calm, grey eyes, the unsmiling mouth. But in the photo, he wore a simple, dark sweater. He looked directly at the camera, his expression as unreadable as it had been at the gate. Caleb Thorne, David said, his voice continuing as if he hadn't just detonated a bomb in the center of the room. He now holds a 53% controlling interest in the parent corporation. The room erupted in a murmur of disbelief. Julian Croft, the airline's slick, ambitious COO, leaned forward. Thorne? Never heard of him. Where did he come from? Tech money. Oil. David clicked again. A new slide appeared. It was a short, almost Spartan biography. Caleb Thorne, former Chief Financial Officer of Airline Global. Resigned 10 years ago. Current residence, a small town in rural Montana. No active corporate affiliations until now. Airline. The name was legendary in the aerospace industry. Their CFO would have been a ghost, a financial wizard operating at the highest levels. Ilara stared at the screen. A man who had managed billions, who had walked away from one of the most powerful positions in the industry, was on his knees fixing a ticket scanner, and he knew her father's name. The question of who he was had been answered. A new, more pressing question took its place. Why? She had to find him. She had to understand. The corporate puzzle of Ascend Air had suddenly become intensely personal. Finding him was not difficult. A man named Caleb Thorne owned a large parcel of land outside a town that was little more than a speck on the map. The challenge was the journey itself. It was a flight on a small propeller plane, followed by a 2-hour drive in a rented luxury sedan that felt increasingly absurd as the paved roads gave way to gravel and then to dirt. The landscape was vast and humbling. The sky was immense, a deep, clean blue she had never seen in the city. Mountains clawed at the horizon. The silence was a presence, broken only by the crunch of tires and the cry of a distant hawk. His property was marked by a simple wooden sign with his name carved into it. A long driveway led to a modest house and a large, barn-like structure that was clearly a workshop. There was no gate, no security, just an open invitation to an entirely different world. She found him in the workshop. The wide doors were open and the air smelled of sawdust and varnish. He was planing a long piece of dark wood, his shoulders moving with a smooth, powerful rhythm. He wore the same kind of simple work clothes as he had at the airport. He didn't seem surprised to see her. He finished his pass with the plane, set it down carefully, and looked at her. The city suit she wore felt like a costume. "You're a long way from home," he said. "I needed to speak with you," she replied, her voice sounding thin in the cavernous space. The boardroom was my arena. This was his. He gestured to a stool. She ignored it, unwilling to cede even that small amount of ground. "The airport," she began. "You were fixing a scanner. It was broken. You're the majority owner of the airline." "The airline is a system. If one part is broken, the whole thing suffers." I wanted to see the parts up close. He picked up a piece of sandpaper and began to work on the edge of the wood, his movements deliberate. She felt the same frustration she had at the gate, the sense of her power being utterly irrelevant. "You mentioned my father." The sanding stopped. He looked at her, his grey eyes seeming to see more than she was comfortable with. "I knew him. A long time ago. Before Airline. He invested in my first project. He was a good man. He believed in building things that last." He ran his hand over the smooth, sanded wood. "Most people only see what's flowering. They miss what's moving underneath. Your father saw the roots." Before she could process this, a small voice called out from the doorway. "Papa?" A little girl stood there, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with dark hair and her father's serious grey eyes. She held a piece of paper in her hand. Caleb's entire demeanor softened. The stoic recluse vanished, replaced by a father. "Hey, Lilybug, what have you got?" The girl, Lily, walked shyly toward him, her eyes fixed on Ilara. She held out the paper. It was a child's drawing of a horse, rendered in bright, impossible colors. "It's for the lady." Lily held the drawing out to Ilara. Ilara stared at it, completely unsure of how to react. It was a transaction she had no protocol for. A gift, given freely. She took the paper. The crayon was waxy under her fingertips. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling foreign. Lily gave a small, solemn nod, then hid behind her father's leg, peering out at Ilara. The child's unconditional acceptance was more disarming than any corporate strategy. It was a bridge, thrown across the chasm between their two worlds. Ilara looked from the drawing to Caleb. He was watching her, his expression unreadable as ever. But she saw it now. The roots. He wasn't just a financier or a recluse. He was a father. He was a craftsman. He was building something here, and she was beginning to suspect that his acquisition of Ascend Air was not about profit. It was about something else entirely. Her phone rang, shattering the quiet. The caller ID read Julian Croft. She almost ignored it, but instinct took over. She excused herself and walked outside, the signal flickering. Ilara, Julian's voice was smooth, a polished veneer over a core of ambition. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "What do you want, Julian?" "Just wanted to touch base about the quarterly projections. I've identified some significant cost-saving opportunities, particularly in the maintenance division. We're overspending on third-party inspections for the older fleet. I think we can bring that in-house, streamline the process. Streamline, she knew, was corporate code for cut corners. I'll review the proposal when I'm back. Of course, just one more thing. That old route, the one to the mountain hubs, Flight 714, the one we finally cut last quarter. I'm getting some pushback from the regional airports. I want to make sure we're aligned on keeping it decommissioned. It was a financial black hole. The casual way he said it sent a chill down her spine. A black hole. She had a sudden, sinking feeling that the name of that flight was critically important. "Send me the file," she said, her voice tight. "I'll look at it." She hung up. When she turned, Caleb was standing in the workshop doorway, a dark silhouette against the light. He had heard. She knew he had. Her private jet was scheduled to leave from the regional airport that evening. A text came through an hour later. The pilot. "Ma'am, there's an issue. The pre-flight check flagged a problem with the fuel line sensor. We're grounded until a new part can be flown in. At least 24 hours. It was too much to be a coincidence. Julian's call. The mention of maintenance. And now, a sudden mechanical failure on her plane. It was a message. A warning. She looked out at the vast, empty landscape. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in hues of orange and purple. She was stranded. Caleb walked out of the workshop. He didn't ask what was wrong. He seemed to already know. "The guest room is ready," he said. "Lily is setting an extra place for dinner." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. For the first time in her adult life, Ilara Vance had completely lost control of the situation. She was in his world now, playing by his rules, and she realized with a startling clarity that she was safer here, in this remote wilderness with a man she barely knew, than she was in the world she had built for herself. The threat was no longer abstract. It was real, and it was aimed directly at her. Section the guest room was simple. A bed with a handmade quilt, a single wooden chair, a window that looked out onto a sea of stars, brighter and closer than she had ever seen them. There was no television, no Wi-Fi password scribbled on a card. The silence was absolute. Dinner was just as unadorned. Stew from a slow cooker, fresh bread, and water. Lily chatted about her day at the small local school, about a fawn she had seen near the creek. Caleb listened, asking quiet questions, his full attention on his daughter. Ilara watched them, a strange ache in her chest. This was a family, a unit. The simple, unhurried rhythm of their life was a language she had forgotten how to speak. She ate, the food tasting more real than any $1,000 meal she'd had in the city. After Lily was put to bed, they sat on the front porch. The air was cool and smelled of pine. "Julian Croft," she said into the darkness. "He was COO before the acquisition. He's pushing to cut the maintenance budget." Caleb didn't respond for a long time. He just stared out at the dark shapes of the mountains. "He was head of procurement a decade ago," he finally said, his voice low, "at a subsidiary that supplied parts to Airline and to Ascend Air." The pieces began to click into place. A terrifying, tragic mosaic. "Flight 714, she said, the words barely a whisper. He turned to look at her, and in the dim light from the house, she could see the profound, ancient grief in his eyes. "My wife was on that flight. Her name was Sarah." The silence that followed was heavy with everything left unsaid. The crash, the investigation, the official report that had surely been a lie. "She was a journalist," he continued, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "She was investigating him. Julian. He was sourcing substandard parts, falsifying inspection records, and taking kickbacks. The company he was using was a shell corporation owned by his brother-in-law. Sarah had the proof. She was flying to meet her source. Ilara felt a cold dread seep into her bones. It wasn't just a cover-up, it was murder. The crash was blamed on pilot error, he said. The black box data was corrupted. The key witnesses were transferred or took early retirement. Julian was promoted a month later. "So you bought the airline," she said, understanding the breathtaking scope of his plan. "I bought the evidence locker," he corrected her. "I bought the personnel files. I bought the maintenance logs they thought were buried. I bought the system that protected him so I could take it apart, piece by piece." "But you're missing something," she realized. The final piece. The proof Sarah had. He nodded slowly. It was on a data key. It was with her on the plane. It was never recovered. He stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the land that was his refuge and his prison. "I have spent 10 years searching. I have everything but the final, undeniable link. Without it, it's just a grieving husband's conspiracy theory." Ilara thought of the grounded jet, of Julian's veiled threats. He knew she was here. He was afraid of what Caleb might have told her, of what she might uncover. Her arrival had accelerated a timeline. It had forced the antagonist's hand. She was no longer just an investor or an observer. She was a target, and she was now his only ally. "There has to be something," she said, standing beside him. "Some backup. Some person she trusted." He was silent for a moment. "Maybe." She sent a package the day before she left, from the post office in town. She told me it was just research notes for another story. A decoy. But she was always careful. Always had a contingency. The post office in a town of fewer than 300 people. Run, no doubt, by the same person for decades. "We need to go there," Ilara said, "first thing in the morning." For the first time, a flicker of something other than grief crossed his face. It might have been hope. Section the town's general store was also its post office. A bell chimed as they entered. The place smelled of coffee beans, old wood, and newsprint. An elderly woman with sharp, intelligent eyes stood behind the counter. "Caleb," she said, her voice warm. "Lily forget her lunch again?" "Not today, Martha. We were hoping you could help us with something. This is Ilara Vance." Martha's gaze settled on Ilara. It was a look that took in the expensive shoes, the tailored slacks, and the tension in her shoulders. It was a look that missed nothing. "Pleasure. What can I do for you?" Caleb took a breath. "Martha, 10 years ago." Sarah sent a package, a small priority box. She would have paid in cash. It was the day before her flight. Martha's warm expression didn't falter, but a deep sadness settled in her eyes. She knew. Of course she knew. In a town this small, secrets were a shared burden. "I remember." She was in a hurry, seemed distracted, worried. She looked from Caleb to Ilara, a long, searching appraisal. "She told me if anything ever happened to her, and if Caleb ever came asking with someone he trusted, someone from the outside, I was to give him this." Martha turned and disappeared into a back room. The sound of a heavy key turning in a lock echoed in the quiet store. She returned with a small, dusty metal box. She placed it on the counter. Inside was a single, padded envelope, yellowed with age. Caleb's name was written on it in his wife's familiar handwriting. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for it. He opened the flap. Inside was not a data key. It was a letter, and a single, old-fashioned, safe deposit box key. Caleb read the letter, his face a mask of stone. Ilara watched his hand close around the page, hard enough to crease it. He looked up. not at her, but through her, at a memory. She knew, he said, his voice thick with a decade of suppressed pain. She knew he might try something. She put the real data on a different key, and she put that key somewhere he would never look. He held up the safe deposit box key. The bank is in the city. The box is registered under her maiden name. The final piece. The smoking gun. It had been waiting, dormant, for 10 years, waiting for the right person to arrive, waiting for someone from the outside, waiting for her. The alliance was sealed. They were no longer just a grieving husband and a corporate raider. They were partners. And they had a plan. Ilara took out her phone. She called her lawyer. "David," she said, her voice clear and hard as steel. "I need you to schedule an emergency board meeting, and I need you to get a court order to freeze all of Julian Croft's personal and corporate assets, pending an internal investigation." She listened for a moment. The grounds are the safety and integrity of this airline. She hung up. She looked at Caleb, the craftsman, the father, the patient, relentless architect of justice. "It's time to go back," she said. "It's time to finish this." He nodded, the safe deposit key clutched in his hand. For Sarah. The return to the city was a strategic assault. Ilara, using her own formidable resources, chartered a different jet from a different airfield. Caleb flew with her. Lily stayed with Martha, a silent understanding passing between the two women. The child would be safe. They went to the bank first. The vault was cold, silent, a tomb of secrets and wealth. The box was small and heavy. Inside, nestled in cotton, was a single USB drive, the kind that looked like a relic from another era. David met them at his office, his face grim. He had the court order. Julian's assets were frozen. The board meeting was set for the next morning. "He's fighting it," David said, plugging the drive into a secure, air-gapped laptop. "He's claiming it's a hostile move, a power play by you and the new owner. He's trying to rally the other board members." "Let him," Ilara said. "Let him feel confident." The files on the drive loaded. It was all there. Encrypted emails, scanned shipping manifests with forged signatures, offshore bank statements showing massive payments from the parts supplier to Julian's Shell Corporation, and a final audio file, a recording of a phone call. Sarah's voice, calm and professional, confronting the supplier, and his voice, panicked, threatening. It was undeniable. It was the nail in his coffin. The plan was simple. It was brutal. It was a boardroom execution. Ilara would lead. She would use the language of corporate governance, of fiduciary duty, of shareholder value. Caleb would be there as the silent, moral authority, the majority owner, the victim. That night, Ilara didn't sleep in her sprawling, empty penthouse. She stayed in a hotel suite near David's office, the same one Caleb was in. They didn't talk about the next day. They didn't talk about the past. He told her stories about Lily learning to ride a bike. She told him about her father, about the pressure to build on his legacy, to be colder, harder, more successful than he ever was. In the quiet of the hotel room, with the city lights spread out like a galaxy below, she felt the corporate armor she had worn for so long begin to crack. She wasn't just avenging a woman she'd never met. She was fighting for a piece of her own soul. The boardroom felt different this time. The air was electric with tension. Julian Croft sat opposite her, flanked by his lawyers. He looked smug, confident. He thought this was a corporate battle, a game he knew how to win. The other board members, a collection of grey suits and worried faces, looked from her to him, trying to gauge which way the wind was blowing. Ilara began calmly. She laid out the initial concerns: discrepancies in the maintenance budget, anomalies in the supply chain records going back more than a decade. She spoke his language: audits, non-compliance, risk exposure. Julian scoffed. This is a baseless witch hunt, a transparent attempt by Mr. Thorne and his new associate to consolidate power. He's a recluse who hasn't been in a boardroom in 10 years, and she's a tech CEO who doesn't know the first thing about running an airline. Ilara let the insult hang in the air. Then she looked at David. David dimmed the lights. The screen at the end of the table lit up. "What you call a witch hunt?" Ilara said, her voice dropping, becoming quiet and lethal. "We call evidence." The first slide appeared, a corporate chart showing the shell company, the parts supplier, and its hidden links to Julian. His face paled slightly. Next, the bank statements. The offshore transfers. Murmurs rippled through the room. Then, the forged manifests. His signature digitized and verified by 3 separate experts on documents approving parts that had failed safety inspections. Julian stood up, his voice shaking with rage. "This is fabricated. Slander!" And then, Ilara played the final card. She played the audio file. The room went completely silent. Sarah Thorne's voice filled the space, clear and steady. Then the supplier's panicked threats. It was damning. It was absolute. When it finished, no one moved. No one spoke. Caleb, who had been silent the entire time, stood up. He did not look at Julian. He looked at the board members, one by one. "My wife, Sarah Thorne, was on Flight 714. She was murdered to cover this up. This company was complicit in that cover-up. That ends today." His voice held no anger, only the immense, crushing weight of truth. Julian Croft sank into his chair. He was broken. The game was over. He hadn't just lost his job, he had lost his life. 2 plainclothes security officers entered the room. They walked to his side. He didn't resist. As they led him away, his eyes met Ilara's. She saw no remorse, only the bitter, hollow shock of defeat. The resolution was swift. The board voted unanimously to turn all evidence over to the authorities. They approved the creation of a massive restitution fund for the families of the Flight 714 victims. And at Ilara's recommendation, they established the Sarah Thorne Aviation Safety Foundation, an independent oversight body funded in perpetuity by the airline. Its mission was to ensure that profit would never again come before people. The victory was total. It was professional. It was ethical. But as Ilara stood in the silent boardroom, the adrenaline fading, she didn't feel the triumph she expected. She only felt a profound sense of quiet, the end of one thing and the beginning of another. She did not return to her old life. She dismantled it. The penthouse was sold in a week. The art collection was auctioned off, the proceeds donated to the new foundation. She resigned from the board of her tech company, promoting a brilliant young successor she had been mentoring for years. She packed what was left of her life into 2 suitcases and the trunk of her car. It was surprisingly little. David met her one last time in his office to sign the final papers. "Are you sure about this, Ilara? You built an empire." "It was a house, David," she replied, looking out the window at the city that had been her kingdom. "Not a home." She drove for 2 days, leaving the steel and glass towers behind, watching the landscape soften into rolling hills, and then rise into the jagged peaks of the mountains. She felt lighter with every mile. When she turned onto the dirt road leading to Caleb's property, she saw him. He was in the distance, working on a long stretch of fence line near the edge of the woods. He looked up as her car approached, but he didn't stop working. He didn't seem surprised. He seemed to have been expecting her. She got out of the car. The silence, once alien, now felt like a welcome. A small figure detached from the house and came running toward her. Lily. The little girl launched herself into Ilara's arms, hugging her tightly around the legs. Ilara found herself kneeling, returning the embrace, her hand stroking the child's dark hair. The simple, unconditional affection was an anchor. Caleb walked over, his tools in his hand. He stopped a few feet away. No words were needed, no grand declarations. The space between them was filled with a quiet understanding. He looked at her car, then at her simple clothes. He looked at her face, which had lost its hard, urban edge. "The top rail on this section is warped," he said, his voice the same low, steady rumble she remembered. "Needs replacing?" He held out a hammer. It was an offering, an invitation. She took it. The wooden handle was smooth and worn, shaped by his hand. Together, the three of them walked to the fence. He showed her how to hold the post steady while he set it. Lily gathered stray rocks to help brace the base. They worked in a comfortable silence, a team building something together, something that was meant to last. As the sun began to dip behind the mountains, they stood back to look at their work. A new section of fence, straight and true. Her hand, holding the hammer, was resting on the top rail. His hand, reaching for a tool, brushed against hers. It was not an accident. His fingers rested there for a moment, a brief, warm pressure. A connection. A promise. Some fences mark where a journey ends. Others mark where a home begins.